Okay, so we're diving deep into Atomic Habits.
Hmm.
Today it's been called The Guide to Building Lasting Habits, so I'm excited to unpack it together.
Yeah, what's really interesting about Atomic Habits is how it kind of changes your whole perspective on making change happen. It's not about those big dramatic overhauls, but more about those small, tiny tweaks you make that can have a huge ripple effect over time.
I love that. It actually reminds me of something James Clear, he's the author, said in the book. He compares making tiny improvements to the power of compound interest.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Like just improving by 1% each day can really add up to some serious growth in the long run, right?
Absolutely. It's so true. And you know what? That's the beauty of Clear's approach. He makes those small steps seem not just manageable, but actually kind of exciting. One of the big takeaways from the book is this four-step model of habit formation cue, craving, response, reward. And Clear breaks down each of these stages and shows how, like, understanding these steps is really the key to building those good habits and ditching the bad ones.
Okay, so let's take a minute and break down this model a little bit. It might be helpful to use some examples to really illustrate each stage.
For sure. So Clear uses the example of a baby bird, right? And it's instinctively pecking at a red dot on its mother's beak. That visual cue is triggering the chick's craving for food, which leads to the pecking, the response, and then, obviously, the reward is getting fed.
Wow, it's amazing how deeply ingrained those patterns are, even from such a young age.
It is.
But how would we apply that same concept to, let's say, building a meditation habit?
Okay, well, imagine you put your meditation cushion in a spot you see every single day.
Okay.
That visual cue then reminds you of that sense of calmness that you're craving, which in turn makes you want to sit down and actually meditate. And the reward, that peaceful, centered feeling you get afterwards.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
I also thought it was so interesting how Clear talks about the Japanese railway systems and how they emphasize this point-and-call system.
Oh, yeah.
Like they actually vocalize each step, even if it's something as routine as pointing at a signal.
Right.
Just to minimize errors.
It's brilliant.
It's like having a built-in accountability system.
And that's a really good point because that point and call system really highlights how important self-awareness is for changing habits. And it's not just for like avoiding mistakes on trains. Clear actually includes this habit scorecard exercise, and it's designed to help you really pinpoint your existing habits, both good and bad. But it goes beyond just, making a list. It's about becoming aware of all those unconscious things we do that end up shaping our lives.
Okay, so once you're actually aware of those habits, then you can start getting strategic and optimizing your environment, right?
Exactly.
Is that what he means by environment design?
Yeah, he calls it environment design. And it's all about making it easier to choose the behaviors we want. Think about it. If you're constantly surrounded by little reminders of your goals, it just becomes natural to stay on track.
So true. Like I started keeping a water bottle right on my desk, and now I'm way better at staying hydrated throughout the day. It's true what they say, out of sight, out of mind, right? But what about those times when motivation just isn't enough?
We tend to put so much emphasis on motivation.
Right.
But Atomic Habits really stresses the power of shaping your environment instead. Like, say you want to eat healthier. Just the simple act of removing those unhealthy snacks from your pantry, that can be huge.
I remember Clear tells this story about John Henry Patterson. Did you get to that part?
Yeah.
Okay, so he bought the patent for the very first cash register. And it was specifically to prevent employees from stealing. Like he made it impossible to steal, which in effect eliminated the bad habit completely.
Pretty clever, huh? It is. Such a great illustration of how to make bad habits impractical. Of course, not all bad habits are going to be that easy to get rid of, though.
And that's where technology can really come in handy, right?
Totally.
Clear talks about using tech to automate good habits and make it harder to fall back on bad ones.
Yeah.
Like setting up automatic savings deductions or using those website blockers to avoid those distracting social media sites.
Oh, for sure.
It's almost like you're outsourcing your willpower to an app.
It's true. Harnessing technology can be super effective.
Yeah.
But even with all the best strategies in place, there are going to be times when motivation just takes a nosedive.
Right.
And that's where Atomic Habits really digs into the psychology behind habit formation. Like Clear's concept of the Goldilocks rule. Have you gotten to that part yet?
Okay, yeah. So tell us about this Goldilocks rule. What's that all about?
So it's about finding that sweet spot, right? The level of challenge that keeps you interested and engaged, working on things that are tough enough to hold your attention, but not so overwhelming that you just want to give up.
I see.
Like, think about a time when you were completely absorbed in something.
Yeah.
What was it about that activity that kept you so engaged? Chances are it hit that sweet spot.
It's that flow state, right? When you're just in the zone and time just disappears.
Exactly. Exactly.
But how do we find that sweet spot consistently, especially when we're trying to build lasting habits?
Well, Clear argues that a lot of it comes down to our identity.
Okay.
He says, we often approach habit change with this goal-oriented mindset, but it's more about shifting your identity, becoming the type of person who naturally embodies those habits.
So instead of saying, like, I'm trying to quit smoking, you'd say, I'm a non-smoker.
Exactly.
That seems like such a subtle difference, but I can see how it would be really powerful.
It is, because it's about aligning your actions with how you see yourself. Right. It's like asking yourself, okay, if I were a healthy person, what would I be doing right now? Or what would a productive artist do? And then actually doing those things.
It's like trying on a new identity, almost.
Yeah.
And the more you act in line with that identity, the more real it becomes.
Exactly. You embody it.
But where do you even begin with that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you actually start living as that new person? It seems a bit daunting when you really think about it.
Well, Clear suggests focusing on small wins. For example, let's say you want to make reading a regular habit.
Okay.
Instead of overwhelming yourself with, I'm going to read for an hour every day, just start with, I'm going to read 1 page.
Right. It's that classic 2-minute rule,
Exactly.
breaking it down into the smallest, easiest step.
Exactly.
But how does just reading 1 page turn you into a reader?
Because each time you follow through, even in that tiny way, you reinforce that identity. You become someone who reads regularly.
Right.
And those small wins create this positive feedback loop. You start to believe in yourself more, which motivates you to keep going.
You get another win, and it just keeps building.
Exactly. It snowballs.
Those little wins, no matter how small, they prove that this new version of yourself is possible. It's not just some fantasy. You're actually living it. But let's be real for a second. Our brains are hardwired to go for those instant rewards rather than wait for something down the line, right?
For sure.
That's why it's so easy to fall into bad habits. They offer that instant gratification, even if you have to deal with the consequences later.
Of course, our brains haven't quite caught up to how we live today. Think about it. Our ancestors were focused on immediate survival, right? Finding food, shelter, long-term planning wasn't really top priority.
Makes sense.
But now, those same instincts, those urges we have, they often sabotage our bigger goals. Things like choosing junk food over a healthy meal, endlessly scrolling through social media, or putting off that big project. It's those things that trip us up.
So how do we get around that? How do we outsmart those ingrained impulses? Bridge the gap between our caveman brains and our very 21st century goals. I mean, Clear has to have some clever strategies for that, right?
Oh, he definitely does. One thing he talks about is finding ways to make good habits immediately satisfying, even if the real payoff isn't for a while.
Okay.
He calls the strategy habit stacking. Basically, it's about linking a new habit you want to build to an existing one that you already enjoy.
So it's like if you love having your morning coffee, maybe you could try stacking a new habit on top of that, like doing a few minutes of journaling while you sip your coffee.
Exactly.
So you're kind of piggybacking on that existing reward system. I like it. But what about those pesky bad habits? Any tips for making those less appealing?
Well, Clear suggests a strategy for that too. Make them immediately unsatisfying.
Oh, okay.
One example he gives is creating a habit contract.
Okay.
It's where you commit to a specific consequence if you don't follow through on the behavior you're trying to change.
Okay.
Imagine, for instance, that you have to donate money to a cause you absolutely can't stand every time you slip up.
Ouch. Okay. That would definitely make me think twice. Talk about an immediate deterrent.
Right.
It's like that saying, the pain of discipline is always less than the pain of regret. Clear also talks about the importance of reflection, right? Like, it's not just about setting these habits and then hoping for the best.
Absolutely not. Atomic Habits really emphasizes the importance of tracking your habits, actually noting your progress and making adjustments as needed. It's like turning habit change into this ongoing experiment. You get to be a scientist in your own life, which I kind of love.
Oh, for sure. And who doesn't love a good experiment?
Exactly.
Plus, just having that visual representation of your progress, seeing those wins add up, that in itself can be incredibly motivating.
It is. It is.
Speaking of motivation, I think it's worth circling back to the Goldilocks rule here. You mentioned it earlier when we were talking about finding that perfect level of challenge when you're first starting out with a new habit, but how does that apply to staying motivated over the long term?
That's a really good point because the Goldilocks rule isn't just about finding the right level of challenge at the beginning. It's about continuing to challenge yourself as you make progress. Think about elite athletes, for example.
Right.
They're already at the top of their game, but they're still constantly pushing themselves to get better, to shave milliseconds off their time. It's about constantly seeking out those opportunities for growth.
So it's about pushing those boundaries a little further each time, never letting yourself get too comfortable.
Exactly. Exactly. Because it's in those moments when we push past our comfort zone that we actually grow the most. Clear actually tells the story about an elite weightlifting coach.
Oh, okay.
And this coach says that the best athletes are often the ones who can handle the boredom of training day in and day out, doing the same lifts over and over again.
It reminds me of that idea we were talking about earlier about professionals sticking to the schedule while amateurs let life get in the way. It's that dedication, that willingness to show up, even when it's not glamorous or particularly exciting, that really makes all the difference.
It really is. Because in the end, it's that consistency, those small, seemingly insignificant actions. Those are the things that ultimately lead to remarkable change.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Atomic Habits, it seems like the big takeaway here is that building lasting change isn't about some superhuman willpower or finding a magic formula for overnight success. It's really about understanding the science behind how habits work, and then using those principles to design a life that supports your goals.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's a process, a continuous one that requires self-awareness, a willingness to experiment, and a commitment to showing up for yourself, even when it's tough.
So for everyone listening, as you're reflecting on all these amazing insights from Atomic Habits, I want to leave you with this. What's one tiny change, one small step you can take today to move yourself closer to those goals? Remember, you don't have to climb Mount Everest in a day.